The Outbreak of Rebellion, The Real History by Ed Stevens, April 2021. Narrator David Clark. Note from the narrator. This pertains to the period of history known as the last days and the end of the age or rule of law by Moses. The real cause of the Zealot rebellion, AD 62. First exodus of Christians from Judea in AD 62. Ichicus of Alexandria, 10th century, claims that one group of disciples who were connected with James, the brother of Jesus, fled from Jerusalem after James's execution in AD 62 and went to the regions of Perea and the Decapolis, the area near Pella. Quistus Festus, governor of Jerusalem, died in AD 62, and the city was without any authority or sovereign to govern it. The Jews then arose and rioted and killed James, son of Joseph, who, known as the brother of the Lord, stoning him to death. Then they harassed a group of disciples and expelled them from the city. The Christians abandoned Jerusalem, crossed the Jordan, and settled in those places, i.e. the region of Perea and Decapolis. Ichicus of Alexandria, 10th century, the Annals of Ichicus of Alexandria, chapter 9, section 7. We do not know from whence Ichicus received this information. It could have been from Hegesippus or Papias, or some other early source. He indicates that those Judean saints began their exodus from Jerusalem as early as April AD 62, right after the high priest Ananias II killed their leader, James. That group had much in common with the Judaizers, who considered James their bishop. If that group was a Judaizing sect of Jewish Christians, then it would be easy to link them to the Nazareans and Ebionites. It seems Epiphanes, 4th century, makes that very connection when he claims that the Nazareans, the Ebionites question, in Pella were directly associated with the group that fled from Jerusalem. According to Epiphanes, the Nazareans, the Ebionites question, were the descendants of those Christians who were Jewish and came from Jerusalem. AD 64 to 66. Gessius Florus, a close friend of Nero, was evidently sent to Judea in the fall of 64 as an executioner to punish condemned malefactors, including Christians. Question. Since he started his governorship in Judea soon after the Neronic persecution began in August 64, it seems likely that one item on his agenda was killing Christians in Judea. Another of his missions appeared to have been robbing all the gold from the temple at Jerusalem. Nero sent governors to other provinces to do the same in order to gather the gold he needed to build his golden palace in Rome. And Florus knew he would not be able to get that gold without provoking the Jews to revolt. So he allowed and encouraged the robbers, bandits, to plunder and spoil the whole Judean countryside in exchange for his share of their booty, hoping that this would stimulate an uprising which would give him an excuse to plunder the gold out of the temple, AD 64 to 66. This continued throughout his year and a half tenure as governor. As a result, the unhappy Jews, when they were not able to bear the devastations which the robbers made amongst them, were all under a necessity of leaving their own habitations and of flying away, as hoped to dwell more easily elsewhere in the world among foreigners. August 64 to May 66. The Neronic persecution, the Great Tribulation, was occurring throughout the Roman Empire. At the same time, these distresses were happening in Judea. This was before the abomination of desolation, the outbreak of the Zealots' rebellion, and the manifestation of the man of lawlessness. The Neronic persecution was cut short by the outbreak of the rebellion, May 12, 66, when both Jews and Romans had to turn their attention to fighting the war. Signs and omens appeared. Xanthicus, Nisan 8th to April 3rd, 66, week before Passover. The temple was illuminated by a bright light for a half hour, 1 week before Passover. See Josephus' Wars. Xanthicus, Nisan 15th, April 10th, 66, Feast of Passover. A heifer, being led to slaughter by the high priest Matthias, gave birth to a lamb in the inner court of the temple. Note from the narrator: a heifer is a female that has not had any offspring, and the massive brazen eastern gate of the inner court opened by itself. Wars 66. Troubles intensify in Judea. Late April or early May 66, the Greeks at Caesarea had obtained control of the city from Nero, and the decree was delivered back to Caesarea by the Gregorian delegation, evidently in the same month that the revolt broke out. The Grecian citizens then made life miserable for the Jewish citizens. On a Sabbath day, there was a riot at the synagogue, which forced the Caesarean Jews to take their scrolls to the nearby city of Narbeta. Violence erupted in Caesarea between the Greek and Jewish residents. The Jewish citizens of Caesarea had bribed Florius with 8 talents of silver, but Florius did nothing to help them. So the conflict continued to worsen, and 5 months later, September 66, after the Zealot rebellion was already underway and strengthening, the Greco-Syrian residents rose up and killed over 20,000 Jews, thus emptying Caesarea of all its Jewish inhabitants. Abomination of desolation and the man of lawlessness. Early May 66, Florius inflamed the situation even more by demanding 17 talents of gold from the temple treasury. When representatives from Florius came to Jerusalem to collect the gold, some brash youths in Jerusalem insulted Florius by taking up a collection for poor Florius. Artemisus, Leor, 15th to May the 10th, 66. When Florius heard about it, he came hastily with soldiers from Sebast, Samaria, to bring Jerusalem into subjection and to punish those who had mocked him. Artemisus, Leor, 16th, May 11th, 66. The next day after arriving in Jerusalem, Florius sent his soldiers into the upper marketplace, where he killed 3,600 Jews. Many of them were well-born citizens and merchants of the equestrian order, along with their women and children. This greatly fanned the flames of rebellion. Artemisus, Leor, 17th, May 12th, 66. On the next day, Florus told the Jews that he was bringing 2 more cohorts of soldiers from Caesarea to join the one cohort that was already there, and that the leaders and citizens of Jerusalem must get out and meet the soldiers that were ascending from Caesarea in a very civil manner. However, Florus had already commanded the soldiers not to return the Jews' salutation, and that if the Jews made any reply to his disadvantage, the soldiers should make use of their weapons. That is exactly what they did. A great many fell down dead by the strokes of the Romans, and more by their own violence in crushing one another at the gates. Once the soldiers got inside the gates, they headed straight towards the temple to take control of it in order to seize all of the gold. However, Eleazar B. Ananias, the captain of the temple guard, was aware of their intentions and blew the ram's horn to rally the citizens, who then blocked the lanes of the city and prevented the soldiers' advance to the temple. Then the forces under Eleazar cut down the cloisters of the temple that adjoined Antonia, so that the Romans no longer had easy access to the temple. When Florus saw this, he broke off his attempt and returned to Caesarea, leaving one of the 3 cohorts behind as a garrison. The man of lawlessness revealed. Rebellion began. Artemisius, Leor 17th, May 12, 66, Hegesippus 553 says that Eleazar was the originator, instigator of the rebellion when he blew the shofar and took control of the temple from that day forward. He fits the description of the man of lawlessness, 2 Thessalonians 2, 1-12. Thus, the war began with the revolt against Florus, and this was in the 2nd year of the government of Florus and the 12th year of the reign of Nero, AD 66. So it appears that this series of events with Florus and Eleazar in mid-May 66 was a time when the abomination was set up, the rebellion began, and the man of lawlessness was revealed, and the abomination which ultimately caused the desolation of the temple must include both Florus's attempt to desecrate the temple as well as Eleazar's seizing control of the temple to unlawfully use it as his fortress and shop of tyranny. From that point onwards, the temple was constantly desecrated, defiled and polluted by bloodshed and other gross abominations which Eleazar allowed to occur, both inside the temple and in the other courts. Josephus condemns and lamented all of these abominations. See Wars 2, 455. And it was the outbreak of the rebellion which cut short the great tribulation for the elect and set the stage for the parousia immediately afterwards, when the elect were gathered out of harm's way and the wrath was poured out on their persecutors. Matthew 24, 21-29. The parousia. Artemisius, Leor 21st, May 16, 66. 4 days after Eleazar took control of the temple, the angelic armies were seen in the sky above Palestine, signalling the arrival of Christ and the beginning of the parousia to rescue the saints and pour out wrath on his enemies. Hegesippus 544 described it in this way. A certain figure appeared of tremendous size, which many saw, just as the books of the Jews have disclosed. And before the setting of the sun, there were suddenly seen in the clouds chariots and armed battle arrays, by which the cities of all Judea and its territories were invaded. Josephus said, Now it happened after this that there was seen over the Holy of Holies for the entire night the outline of a man's face, the like of which beauty had never been seen in all the land, and his appearance was very awesome. Moreover, in those days were seen chariots of fire and horsemen, a great force flying across the sky, low to the ground, coming against Jerusalem and all the land of Judea. All of them horses of fire and riders of fire. Josephus on chapter 87. Josephus recorded it as follows. A certain prodigious and incredible phenomenon appeared. I suppose the account of what seemed to be fable, were it not related by those who saw it, and were not the events that followed it of so considerable a nature as to deserve some signals. For before sunsetting, chariots and troops of soldiers in their armour were seen running around in the clouds and surrounding the cities. This occurred just before sunset on Artemisius, 21st, May 16th, in AD 66. Thus, Josephus gives us the exact date and hour when this occurred. Resurrection, change of the living, and the rapture. Deicius, Sivan VI, May 30, 66, Feast of Pentecost. 2 weeks after the angelic armies were seen in the sky on the day of Pentecost in AD 66, the priests in the temple heard a great multitude in the unseen realm, departing from one place and going to another. This was evidently the resurrection of the dead out of Hades, the bodily change of the living saints, and the rapture. Here are the historical references to this event. Moreover, at that feast, which we call Pentecost, as the priests were going by night into the inner court of the temple, as their custom was, to perform their sacred ministrations, they said that in the first place they felt a quaking and heard a great noise, and after that they heard a sound as of a great multitude saying, "Let us remove hence." Josephus Wars 6. When the holiday of Shavuot came in those days, during the night the priests heard within the temple something like the sound of men walking, the sound of many men's marching feet walking within the temple, and a terrible and mighty voice was heard saying, "Let us go and leave this house." Josephus, chapter 87. Moreover, in the celebration itself of the Pentecost, the priests entered the interior of the temple at night time, that they might celebrate the usual sacrifices, inserted themselves at first to have felt a certain movement and a sound given forth, afterwards even to have heard shouting in a sudden voice, "We cross over from here." For all details, request PDF Let Us Go. June 66. Soon after this, King Agrippa returned from Alexandria and met with the Jewish people in Jerusalem. He gave a long speech about the horrors and futility of war, hoping to deter them from rebellion, but to no avail. After being insulted by the angry mob, Agrippa took his entourage and departed for his own territory. This ended the collection of taxes for Rome. Professor H. Graetz suggests that this occurred in Sivan the 25th, that's June 1866. Late June 66, Hegesippus stated that shortly after Agrippa departed from Jerusalem, the instigators of war, ambushes having been arranged, captured Masada, a fortress. The guards of the Romans having been killed, they stationed their own men, and Josephus seems to indicate that it was Menahem who took his soldiers to Masada and overpowered the Roman guard, opened the armory and distributed the weapons to his own men and to the others from the region who joined with him. Daily sacrifices ceased. Sacrificial system invalidated. Late June 66, about that same time, soon after Agrippa left Jerusalem, Eleazar b. Ananias, the son of the foremost of the priests, a man of reckless boldness, persuaded that an offering or sacrifice of a foreigner should not be accepted, which was a trumpet call of war, rebellion against the Romans, and aroused everyone into an uproar. Eleazar was persuading those that officiated in the divine service to receive no gift or sacrifice for any foreigner. This was not only an act of rebellion against the Romans, but also a blatant violation of the law of God, which invalidated the whole sacrificial system. Josephus says this incident with Florus, along with their insults against Agrippa and the rejection of all sacrifices from foreigners, including Caesar, was the true beginning of our war with the Romans. July 66. Eleazar's father, Ananias b. Nedebeus, who was probably the most powerful high priest at that time, along with most of the other priests, leaders and citizens of Jerusalem, condemned this lawless action of Eleazar, which stopped the sacrifices of foreigners. They made a noble effort to dissuade Eleazar from this course of action, but he defiantly persisted. Since the rebellion was now growing stronger every day, the moderate leaders were becoming desperate to shut it down. They sent messages to Florus and Agrippa asking for soldiers. Then they took control of the outer city and Herod's fortress to strengthen their position against the rebels in the lower city of the temple. Because Ananias B. Nedabius was a moderate and pro-Roman loyalist, the zealot rebels wanted him eliminated. He was a restraining influence against them. So it is no surprise to see Ananias become one of the first casualties of this conflict, thus fulfilling Apostle Paul's prophecy about him 8 years earlier. Paul referred to Ananias as being a lawbreaker at that time, AD 58. So it is no surprise to see his son Eleazar become an even worse lawbreaker. Ananias was a restraining influence on Eleazar until he was killed by Menahem, August 28, 66. Luz, AV 6th, July 28, 66. Fighting then broke out between the upper and lower city for 7 days. Luz, AV 14th, August 5th, 66. On the next day was the feast of xylophary, wood gathering for the altar. The rebel forces in the temple were reinforced by Sicarii and others, which enabled them to drive Agrippa's soldiers out of the upper city, after which they looted and burned the house of Ananias B. Nedabius, Agrippa's palace, Bernice's palace, and the archives building, where all debtors' records were stored. Thus, Eleazar's soldiers solidified their control of both the temple and the lower city. Then the moderates and loyalists, including Ananias and Agrippa's soldiers, fled to the upper palace and used it as their fortress. Luz, AV 15th, August 6th, 66. On the next day, Eleazar and his soldiers besieged Antonia for 2 days, killed the Roman soldiers and burned it. August 66. Then Eleazar and his men went to the upper palace and fought with Agrippa's soldiers continuously day and night for 18 days, according to Graet. Late August 66. Evidently, Menahem, the son of Judas the Galilean, founder of the Zealots, returned from Masada to Jerusalem about this time and entered as if he were king. He took control of the Zealot soldiers who were attacking the upper palace and then continued that siege. Man of lawlessness, restraints removed. Gorpius, Elul, 7th, August 28, 66. On the next day, the high priest, Ananias B. Nedabius, father of Eleazar, was caught hiding in an aqueduct and then slain together with his brother Hezekiah by Menahem's soldiers. This was not just a random act of violence against an insignificant citizen of Jerusalem. Ananias B. Nedabius was probably the most powerful ruler of the Jews at that time. He was a moderate and pro-Roman loyalist, and he was a restraining influence upon his son Eleazar, as well as against the whole zealot cause. So, the zealots, rebels, wanted him eliminated. Thus, Ananias was one of the first aristocratic casualties of the rebellion, which not only fulfilled Apostle Paul's prediction about Ananias in AD 58, but also his prophecy in AD 52 about the restrainer being taken out of the way, 2 Thessalonians 2, 1-12. Paul referred to Ananias as being a lawbreaker back then, AD 58. So it is no surprise to see his son Eleazar become an even worse lawbreaker. After Ananias was killed by Menahem, August 28, 66, and his restraining influence on Eleazar was removed, then Eleazar's true lawless character was revealed. Late August 66. Menahem's victory over the moderates and Agrippa's soldiers puffed him up and made him barbarously cruel like a tyrant. He thought he had no rivals who could contest his power, but Eleazar pointed out that they did not gain their freedom from one tyrant, Rome, merely to hand it over to another tyrant, Menahem. So Eleazar, along with his soldiers and many of the citizens, attacked Menahem and his bodyguard in the temple, where he was pompously parading himself in royal garments. Menahem fled to Ophla, but was quickly found, tortured and killed along with his captains. Thus, Eleazar avenged his father's death by killing his murderer, Menahem. This further consolidated most of the rebel forces under Eleazar's control, and now that Eleazar was free from his father's restraining influence, his lawless conduct rapidly escalated, just as the Apostle Paul had predicted 14 years earlier. See Thessalonians 2, 1-12. Eleazar broke his oath. September 66. Eleazar and his soldiers continued their siege of the Roman soldiers in the three towers until Miletus, the Roman commander, offered to surrender the tower and lay down their arms in exchange for their lives. Eleazar granted the request, but then broke his promise as soon as all the soldiers laid down their arms. All of the Romans were slain, except Metilius, who promised to convert to Judaism. Josephus said that this breach of oath not only provoked Roman revenge, but the wrath of God. September 66. And that wrath did not wait long to be poured out. The day on which Eleazar killed the Roman soldiers was a Sabbath, and on that very same day and hour in Caesarea, the Gentile citizens rose up against the Jewish citizens and slew 23,000 of them in 1 hour's time, thus emptying Caesarea of its Jewish inhabitants. Zealot rebellion becomes the Jewish revolt. September 66. The massacre in Caesarea was a turning point. It incited the whole nation of Jews to take up arms and join the war effort. They immediately formed several bands of soldiers and spread out to attack the villages of the Syrians and other cities, including Philadelphia, Sabonitis, Geracia, Pella, Scythophilus, Gadara, Hippus, Gordonites, Cadasa, Ptolemais, Gaba, Caesarea, Sabast, Ascalon, Enthedon and Gaza. September 66. And in retaliation for that attack, many of the Syrian cities rose up against their Jewish inhabitants. Ascalon slew 2,500 Jews, Ptolemais 2,000, Tyre, Hippus and Gadara large numbers. There was a huge slaughter, 50,000 of Jews in Alexandria. Cestus Gaius initiates the Roman response. September 66. With all Palestine up in arms now, Cestus Gaius, Roman leaguer in Antioch, decided to march the 12th Legion to Ptolemais, along with Agrippa's troops and melee auxiliaries, about 30,000 soldiers. Feast of Booths or Tabernacles, Sukkot, October the 4th, 66. Cestus wrapped up his Galilean campaign, gathered his troops at Caesarea, and then marched through Antiparis and Lydia, killing all resistance and burning their cities. Then he camped at Gabeo, which was near Beth Horon. Most of the Jewish men of the villages were in Jerusalem for the Feast of Tabernacles. When they heard that Cestus had just attacked and burned some of their nearby cities, they grabbed their weapons and ran to Gibeah to fight with Cestus. Mid-October 66. Then Cestius advanced to Jerusalem to attack the walls and could have easily captured it, but for reasons which are not totally clear. He withdrew his troops and headed back towards Caesarea with the zealot soldiers right behind them. Dias Mahesvan 8th, October 27, 66. The army of Cestus Gallus then suffered a humiliating defeat at Beth Horon. As they attempted to retreat to Caesarea, they lost 5,300 footmen and 380 horsemen, plus huge amounts of weaponry, equipment, baggage and supplies. The Jewish rebels went dancing and singing back to Jerusalem with all that plunder. They saw this victory as a sign from heaven that God was on their side, and that they would ultimately be victorious over the Romans, and that the kingdom would once again be restored to Israel. They never imagined that this was merely the beginning of the end. Soon afterwards, Vespasian and Titus brought the 4 Roman legions to pour out God's wrath on the Jews and completely shatter the rebellion. Late October or early November. Immediately after Cestus Gallus was defeated, Josephus tells us that many of the most eminent of the Jews swarm away from the city, as from a ship when it was going to sink. Constaborus and Saul, who were brothers, together with Philip, the son of Jasimus, who was the commander of King Agrippa's force, ran away from the city and went to Cestus. Wars 2556. Note about the date calculations in the above narrative. The Hebrew lunar calendar date for Passover varies as much as 29 days from the earliest, March 26, to the latest, April 24. For example, see the 20-year Passover Pentecost calculator down below. Thus, the median date of Passover, April the 10th, was derived by adding 15 days, half of the 29 days, to the earliest date for Passover, March 26. See the 20-year Passover Pentecost calculator chart in the next section. Since we know Passover fell on Nisan 14th or 15th, and we know the number of days in each month, we are able to calculate the median dates of all these events in Josephus. The median dates do not deviate more than 2 weeks before or after the actual dates on which these dates occurred. That is close enough for practical purposes. The following Macedonian calendar chart was derived from at least 3 different web pages that were found by searching for Josephus Macedonian calendar. This chart gives the names of the Macedonian months and their Hebrew month equivalents, plus how many days were allotted to each month and their equivalent months in their Julian Gregorian calendar. The Macedonian calendar chart, followed by 20-year Passover Pentecost calculator. Notice the year 2013 to 5773, Passover 3/26/13, Pentecost 5/14/13, and the year 2005 to 5765, Passover 4/24/05, Pentecost 6/12/05. Using these charts and calculation methods, we can derive the following dates in AD 66. Xanthicus I, March 27, Xanthicus 15, Passover, April the 10th. Artemisius 1st, April 26th. Dionysius 6th, Pentecost, May 30th. Dionysius 1st, May 25th. Tishra 1st, Rosh Hashanah, September the 30th. Panamas 1st, June 24. Tishra 10th, Yom Kippur, September the 29th. Luz 1st, July 23rd. Tishra 16th, Sukkot, October the 4th. Gulpia Ius 1st, August the 22nd. Hyperberatius 1st, September the 20th. Dios 1st, October the 20th. Spelling of months used by Josephus. Macedonian months and the Hebrew months. Months and dates mentioned in Josephus. Josephus used Macedonian month names with Hebrew month equivalents. This is how we confirm that Josephus used the newer Macedonian calendar. Here is a list of the passages in Josephus where he mentions at least one of the Hebrew or Macedonian months. In Antiquities and Wars. For further information, obtain your copy of The Final Decay Before the End by Ed Stevens, obtained from his website. Also, The Wars of the Jews, obtained from our website upon request as a PDF or as a hard copy from amazon.co.uk or amazon.com.